All right, guys, so this is Miss Watkins. This is actually take 2 of the video because Boone has learned how to open up the door and he just came in. So hopefully I can record this on one take. So I'm in my Chinese classroom. You can see like my map and stuff back there. I've got flags and stuff. But so we can't do the after school study session this trimester. So this is the next best thing. But hopefully it'll still help you and it'll still do like what I hope that it would. It'll help prepare you for the test, okay? So I'm gonna go through all the questions. Remember, it's 30 multiple choice, 10 fill in the blank, and then the open response. And we talked about the open response in class today. It was how did FDR change the face of the government and the presidency? And we talked about how he revolutionized it using minorities, through legislation, through things that are still around today, and then just his use of the executive branch. And we looked at all those facts. Don't forget about your thesis and use that chicken claw method. Make sure that you have all that. Okay, so let's talk about the test. Hopefully we'll be able to get done really quickly through it. And then I'll also tell you what the bonus question is going to be, okay? All right, so question number 1 talks about prohibition and how did it contribute to the growth of organized crime. So if you remember, we looked at that in the 1920s stations, and we talked about how the police just weren't able to patrol prohibition. So it causes more bootleggers. It makes it easier for them just to do all these illegal activities. You see mafia members getting on the rise. Now in 1933, we repeal prohibition with the 21st Amendment. So prohibition is the 18th. We repeal it with the 21st. So don't get those mixed up. That's one of the choices. They try to mix you up with the 18th, but you're going to pick 21st. Now after World War I, our economy took a brief period of a recession. We had all this stuff that was rationed during the war, and now that the war's over, we are going to just allow people to buy that. So what a lot of stores did is they would jack up the price for those goods, and it caused a brief period of recession. But once we got through that in that year, then we see lots of prosperity, lots of economic growth. Things look great for America, and that's where you get the roaring 20s and the big boom that happens. A lot of people are making their money during the Great Depression by buying stock on margin. Remember, buying stock on margin is like buying it on credit. Like, I don't have the money, but I'll pay you back when I sell it. And that works as long as stock prices rise. But when they start to drop, that's when it doesn't work anymore. So you want to pick the choice where it talks about stock prices going up. That's when buying stock on margin is profitable. And that's what causes the stock market crash, is when all of those bottom out and the prices go down. During the 1920s, not everybody's making a lot of money. If you remember, the farmers are definitely suffering economically. They'd done really well during the war because we needed so much food for our allies and for our troops. So we need all this extra food. So they took out mortgages to get more land, and they were making some good money during the war. But now the war's over, we don't need all that food. So they've got all this extra land now for nothing. So the 1920s are bad for them, and then the 1930s get worse. All the presidents, if you remember all of those Republican presidents that we had during the 1920s, you've got Warren G. Harding, he dies, then you get Calvin Coolidge, then after Calvin Coolidge, it's Herbert Hoover. All those are Republicans. So Republicans, all of them had promoted laissez-faire. Just keep your hands off of the economy and everything's gonna go great, everything's gonna boom. FDR is the first one to get away from laissez-faire, or that hands off. He's gonna put his hands all in business because we're in the Depression. And he feels like the government's responsibility is to take care of that. So he's going to be the first president to really get away from laissez-faire. All those other Republican presidents, that was what they were about. We also talked about in the 1920s, there's a big clash with the Scopes trial. We've got traditionalist versus modernist. These two ideas of, is religion important? Is it not important? Those two ideas are kind of clashing in the 1920s with our morals. So the Scopes trial brings a lot of that out. It's, should we teach evolution or should we not? Should we base off of our religion or should we not? So at the heart of this trial, it's a clash between religion and science. When you really look at it, are we going to go by religion or are we going to go by science? We need to choose which one, okay? Now, one of the choices says evolution in it, but don't pick that one because it says that this was a clash between evolution and science, but those are the same, like science and evolution, it was on the same page. It's between religion and science. Henry Ford was also a character we talked about in the 1920s with his Model T. Now, he was able to sell that really, really affordably. It's the first car. The Model T is the first car that the average American could afford. So how is he able to do that? Well, he puts his cars on assembly lines, and it reduces the time that it takes to make the car. There is a choice on here. It says the location of Ford's plant in the cities allowed him to sell more cars and reduce the price. Well, his location of his plants were on the rivers, if you remember. It was cutting out the middleman, so he was able to save some money. But what causes him to be able to save the most money is from that assembly line. And remember, we did the assembly line s'mores. That's what that is. You went from taking 12 hours to build one Model T to taking an hour and a half. In 90 minutes, you could have that full car made. Also in the 1920s, we talked about the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem Renaissance is centered in Harlem, and it's where all these Black Americans are at, and it is rich with culture. They're writing books, they're writing music, they're doing all these things in art, doing these paintings. All of it is exploring the pains and joys of being Black in America, the good things and the bad things. All that together. Zora Neale Hurston is one of the most famous ones. She does Their Eyes Were Watching God. It becomes really iconic for that time. But it's all about the good stuff and the bad stuff about being Black in America. And Harlem was the focal point for that. Okay, also in the 1920s, we talked about the Teapot Dome scandal. So it's named after the place, Teapot Dome, Wyoming. There were some oil reserves that were out there that the Navy had owned. And so this guy named Albert Fall, the Secretary of Interior, decides he's going to cash in on those oil reserves. So he thinks that nobody would even know, but he transferred those oil reserves to oilmen. I think Harry Sinclair was the guy that he works with, and that he ends up making lots of money off of that when it wasn't his to lease out. So he gets in a lot of trouble, and it's a scandal for Warren G. Harding because it was one of his friends. Okay, the next thing is a picture, which I'm looking right at your test. It's on my computer screen. So this is an image, and it's got these two girls, and they're walking, and they're wearing dresses that are to their knees, very scandalous. They're showing their necks. They've got short hair, and they're wearing lots of makeup. So it says, who is depicted in this photograph? And this is the new woman who is the flapper in the 1920s. Before that, you had the Victorian age where you covered everything from your neck to your ankles. And now they're kind of exploring different ways of dressing and looking because it's after World War I and everybody died in the war. So it's kind of like that, like, I'm going to live this life to the fullest. And if that's not morally right, then I don't want to be right. It's kind of this idea with these women. Okay, now in the 1920s, everything's not been super great. We get in 1929, the stock market crash. So the reason why the stock market crashes is because you have these investors who lose confidence in the market and they rush to sell their stocks, okay? That's what causes the stock market to crash. They start thinking that the stocks are declining, so everyone starts selling them. And when people are selling them and there's not much like being bought, that causes the prices to drop and drop. I mean, if there's a lot out there to buy, if everyone's selling their house at the same time, it makes the price go down. And so then the stock market just bottoms out. No stocks are worth anything because everybody's selling them. Nobody's buying them. So when they rush to sell their shares, that's what causes the stock market crash. There's one on here. One of the choices says wealthy depositors lost investments and they try to withdraw their money from the banks. That does happen, but that's after the stock market crash. So the stock market crashes because people are selling their stocks, causing the price to bottom out. Got another picture. So there's a picture of a house and there's a barn. And there's all this dirt piled up beside it. It almost looks like it's snowstorm. Like you've got all this snow that's piled up against the barn, but it's not, it's dirt. So it says, what does this photograph show? And that's the Dust Bowl. And it shows a home. It's out in Oklahoma that you could see all the dirt's just been pushed up against their house. And there's just dirt and dust for miles and miles. Now, what happened on Black Tuesday? So here's another question, kind of tags off of that one that we just saw. So Black Tuesday is where investors sell more than 16 million shares of stock. So see how many are being sold and nobody's buying. And it just makes the prices go down and down. Here's probably one of the hardest questions on the test, excuse me. It's the Hawley Smoot tariff. So Hoover, remember in the beginning, he doesn't do anything when the Depression happens because he thinks it'll fix itself. But then he decides, maybe if we jack up our tariffs, it will help, because if you have a high tariff, that means that the foreign goods are really expensive. So people are going to buy American. So he jacks up the tariff, calls it the Hawley Smoot tariff. But what it does to European countries is it ticks them off. So they make their tariffs higher so we can't sell it to them. So now we shot ourselves in the foot with other countries. So all we have is our country. Well, the American goods are way too expensive. People are trying to get millions of dollars out of their goods because they're poor and everybody else is poor and they can't pay that. So it just ends up causing the Great Depression to get even worse using that Black Tuesday, or on Black Tuesday. So that's the Hawley Smoot tariff, okay? Now another question about the Dust Bowl. How did farmers contribute to the problems of the Dust Bowl? So there was already a drought. We already knew that was a problem, but how do farmers kind of make this even worse? They're over farming. There's intensive farming that's going on. They've got new machinery. Remember, they bought it from World War I because they were wanted to pump out more food because they're making such good money. But now that we've got the Depression, they need to farm as much as they can. Well, it's causing all of the grasses to be eroded from the ground. There's no nutrients in the ground anymore for their crops. So crops aren't growing well, grass isn't growing well. And now that you don't have that grass holding down the dirt, and there's this drought, the wind is going to come and pick up all of that dirt. And that's what causes the Dust Bowl. So they don't mean to do it, but that over farming, trying to make money, causes the Dust Bowl. So the unemployment rate during the Depression gets awful. It's 25%. But for African Americans, it is double the national rate. Remember, it was 24.9% for all the United States. For minorities, it's 50%. So it's pretty much double what the national rate was, because they're always the first to be fired, the last people to be hired. Hoover, we already talked about, responds cautiously. So Herbert Hoover is the president. He wins in 1928. Stock market crash happens in 1929. So he's the president during the Great Depression, and everyone blames him for that. And it's kind of rightly so, because in the beginning of the Depression, he doesn't do anything. He responds so cautiously, but it's because in his head, he thinks that this is going to all fix itself. That's what always happens. It's always happened before. And so he just thinks that once that business cycle corrects itself, I won't need to do anything. And it's a big error on his part. Okay. What really seals the deal for him, though, I mean, everyone's upset with him, but what really causes problems for him is in 1932, he refuses to help with World War I veterans bonuses. So a lot of people are just not gonna like that. And what they really don't like is his volunteerism, trickle-down economics. Those aren't working. So there's a couple choices in here that are going to try to catch you. One of them says President Hoover was a Democrat and the American public had grown weary of the party. It's true, all except for the Democrat part. He's a Republican. People had gotten tired of the Republican Party because they were the ones that had been in the presidency when the Great Depression happens. So you can't pick that one. There's another one that says Congress passed a bill to pay World War I veterans their bonuses early. Well, that's not why they don't like Hoover. Hoover was the one that vetoed that bill, but they would have been happy about Congress passing the bill. So it can't be that. It's that they don't like his policies. When he finally does do something, he relies on charities to just volunteer their money. And he also is trying to do trickle-down economics. But remember, that don't work. When people hold on to the money and they don't let the money trickle down, then it doesn't work. And so he wastes all this money that he thought was going to help, and it ends up not. Where did most Dust Bowl migrants go? Remember, they're called the Okies, and they are traveling to California. And even when they get to California, a lot of them don't get to stay because there's just not work out there because everyone's going to California. Why were banks one of the first institutions to feel the effects of the stock market crash? If you remember, after the stock market crashes, everyone goes to the banks to try to get their money because now they know I owe a ton of money to a bunch of people and they're going to break my kneecaps if I don't pay them. So they go and get their money. But the problem is that the banks have been given a lot of that money into the stock market too, trying to make money. So when people go to the bank to secure their money, it's going to cause all of them to crash, all of that to end up not having enough money in there. So people lose confidence in the economy. They're going to go and remove their money from the banks, and then that causes them to crash when that happens, okay? There's one choice that kind of looks right. And remember, you always got to look for them. It says after the stock market crash, people went to secure their hard money so they could circulate it back into the economy. Well, that's not why they're going to get the money. They're going to get the money so they can keep it and have it. So just make sure you don't pick that one. It's another one of those that's kind of right, but it's got one part that makes it wrong. Okay, why did the bonus army march on DC? This is probably the most missed question, and it's so easy, but it's because people get tricked by the choices, okay? So the reason why they march is that President Hoover vetoes the bill providing payment of their bonuses, okay? Now, one of the choices says the Federal Reserve refused to pay veterans their bonuses. That's not true. The Federal Reserve didn't have anything to do with it. It's all Hoover. The reason why I think people pick that one is on this version, it's the very first choice. So I think they just don't even read the other choices. Make sure that you read the whole question. So it's not the Federal Reserve refused to pay their bonuses. General MacArthur attacked them demanding their bonuses, attacked the protesters. That's not why they marched. He does that after they marched, so that can't be the reason why. And then it says Congress passed a bill promising to pay veterans their bonuses. They went to march for that. That's a good thing. They were glad that Congress signed that. It's when Hoover vetoes the bill. That's what causes them to march, okay? So be careful on that one. There's a lot of choices that look right, and you want to make sure that you pick the one that is actually accurate, the most right answer. Okay, so what did Congress do to deal with the banking crisis? FDR instills a bank holiday. It was 4 days. You had to take a break for 4 days and get everything in your bank lined out. And if it was all lined out, after the 4 days, then you could open up. If not, you weren't allowed to open. What were the goals of the New Deal? If you remember, he had a kind of like a tier system. He wanted relief, recovery, and reform. Relief is immediate stuff like, I need food today. So those were jobs that you could get money that day from them. Recovery is stuff within the next year, like the banks. We need to fix the banks. So let's get them recovered all in the next year. And then reform is how can we make sure this never happens again 5, 10, 20 years down the road. So we're going to make some changes to where we ensure that won't happen for people in the future. Times were really hard during the 1930s, but a lot of people started going to the movies. And the reason why they're going to the movies is to escape their concerns. It helps them to forget about all the stuff that they've been going on through. It's kind of like when you've watched a movie and you feel like you're in it. That's how it is for these people. And it gives them kind of a break from the stuff that's going on in their lives. But at home, you wouldn't be able to watch a movie. What you'd be using at home is the radio. And some of the biggest radio shows, you got the Lone Ranger, you got the Shadow, a lot of those radio series that people would listen to. It's kind of like a TV series, but you got to listen to it. So one would come on every day and the family would go and listen. One of the radio shows was so realistic, people thought aliens were actually attacking Earth. It was called War of the Worlds. If you remember, Tom Cruise made a movie of it. It's a book. But so people were listening to this radio broadcast and they thought it was real. They were like kissing their babies, crying, telling people they loved them because they really thought they were going to die. So that was War of the Worlds. We also during this time get something that's never happened before. It's called the Federal Art Project. The government pays artists to do art, to do concerts, to do paintings, all these things, they're paying them. So this is the first time we've had federal funding of the arts. The federal government's never done that before. And it's because we want to preserve the art. That's our culture. And if we don't have any of that for a decade, we're going to be missing out on a lot of things. Okay, another choice that says the Teapot Dome scandal. Who was the official involved? It is Albert Fall. I always think he took the fall for the scandal. And then it says what happened when the veteran groups marched in protest. So this was another one of those that deals with the bonus army and is kind of a little catchy. So you got to watch to make sure that you're not going to choose the wrong one. So what happens after the veterans march? Federal troops use tear gas and march with bayonets. Lots of the veterans are injured, okay? One of the choices says that Congress ordered MacArthur to use federal troops to remove them. That's not true. It wasn't Congress who did that. It was Hoover who did that. Remember, that's why people don't want to vote for him in 1932. So again, just be careful you don't choose the wrong choice. What is the first film with synchronized sound? It was the first talkie. It's called The Jazz Singer, which if you remember watching that, it was about an African-American man but they wouldn't allow African Americans to be actors. So they would only use white actors who would paint their faces black, which was just terrible that they would do that. But that was just part of the racism of the 1920s. This is a strong political force created by FDR, gives Democrats the majority, and it unites African Americans, blue-collar workers, white Southerners, and farmers. It's called the New Deal Coalition. Looks like coal, like black coal, and then "ishin" on the end of it. So these are 4 people that used to vote Republican, but because of FDR, they're going to vote Democrat. So they call it the New Deal Coalition because of what he does in the New Deal. It makes them want to vote Democrat because he's a Democrat. Hey, who wrote The Grapes of Wrath? It's about the Jowett family that traveled during the Dust Bowl. It was John Steinbeck is his name. Very famous book during that time. This guy was a wealthy banker. He serves under the Harding and Coolidge administrations. He trims the debt, the national budget. I mean, he's just great for the economy. His name's Andrew Mellon. You only need to know his first and last name. So Andrew Mellon. How many presidential terms was FDR elected to? He was elected to 4. He only serves 3 of them because he dies at the beginning of the 4th, but he is elected to 4. Monumental. No other president has ever done that. So then it asks about a New Deal Act. So this is something from your flip book that restricted agricultural production, paid farmers not to plant on their land to kill off excess livestock. That is the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. So you want to pick that AAA. There was something passed in the second New Deal. So this isn't our flip book. Our flip book was only the first New Deal. But in the second New Deal, we get something passed to help retirees and the elderly. It doesn't help widows, farmers, or African Americans, but it does help the majority of elderly people. That's Social Security. Or you could put the Social Security Act. We also had another New Deal. So back to the flip book, the first New Deal. This is a public works program for unemployed, unmarried men between the ages of 18 and 25. They planted trees, created parks. That's the CCC. So you'll want to make sure that you remember the difference between that. And then last question is FDR's attempt to change the Supreme Court. Remember, the Supreme Court was ruling all of his stuff unconstitutional, and they were getting rid of all of it. Like the AAA, they got rid of it. And they said, you can't tell somebody what to do with their land. That's unconstitutional. And so they start like dismantling all the stuff that he's passed. He freaks out, but he can't fire these guys because once you're on the Supreme Court, you're on for life. So what he decides to do is he says, I'm going to pass this new law, the Judiciary Reorganization Bill. On the test, you're just going to put court packing. Okay, so he says, I'm going to pack the court. I can't fire you guys, but it doesn't say that I can't hire new people. It doesn't say I have to have 9 justices. I could have 15. I could have 20. So what I'm going to do is if you don't agree with me, I'm going to get some young guys who do agree with me. I'm going to appoint them to the Supreme Court, and I'm going to make sure they cancel out every one of your votes. If you vote yes, they're going to vote no. If you vote no, they're going to vote yes every single time. So your vote's going to be worthless. So he threatens them with court packing, and it works. It ends up causing them to both compromise and to back down. All right. That is the whole test. Now, I wanted to give you your bonus question since you've made it all the way to the end. The bonus question is, what was the famous artwork that Dorothea Lange did? Remember, that was the